She bought a coffee, not knowing it would change her life. He pretended to be homeless but hid a big secret. An act of kindness sparked an irresistible love. When the truth comes to light, will it be too late? If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. The aroma of coffee permeated the air of the small cafe on the corner of Michigan Avenue, where Sarah huddled against the intense cold of that January morning in Chicago. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted her scarf, trying to protect herself from the icy breeze that insisted on finding gaps in her clothes. The line was longer than usual, probably due to the weather that made everyone seek a bit of warmth in hot drinks. While waiting, Sarah checked her watch once more. She was late for the meeting at the advertising agency where she had worked for 2 years, but she couldn't start her day without her double espresso. It was her ritual, her small indulgence before facing another day of battles in the competitive world of advertising. That's when her eyes captured an image that made her momentarily forget her own discomfort. A man was sitting on the sidewalk near the entrance to the cafe. It wasn't uncommon to see homeless people in that area, but there was something different about him. Maybe it was the way he maintained an upright posture, even while sitting on the cold ground, or the way his eyes seemed distant, contemplating something beyond the frantic movement of the city. He held an empty cup between hands, protected by fingerless gloves worn by time. His face was partially covered by a dark beanie pulled down almost to his eyes, and a stubble beard shadowed his features. His clothes, although visibly worn, seemed to have been chosen with some care, overlapping layers that protected him from the cold efficiently. When it was her turn to place her order, Sarah felt an impulse she couldn't explain. 2 double espressos, please, she requested, surprising herself. It wasn't her nature to give to charity, not because she didn't want to help, but her own financial situation was precarious enough to make her think twice before any extra expense. As she left the cafe with 2 steaming cups in her hands, she approached the man. He wasn't asking for anything, wasn't extending his hand or carrying any sign. He was just there, as if that piece of sidewalk was his observation post of the world. "Excuse me," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "I thought you might want a coffee. It's very cold today." The man raised his eyes, and Sarah felt something strange in her stomach. It wasn't the vague or lost look she expected to find, but rather a pair of intense brown eyes, alert and surprisingly intelligent. For a moment, she had the impression that he could see through her, as if her layers of professional protection, the carefully chosen blazer, the precise makeup, the perfectly arranged hair, were transparent. "Thank you," he replied, his voice hoarse but clear, without the slurring of words she had unconsciously expected. His fingers brushed hers when he took the cup, and Sarah noticed that despite the cold, his hands were warm. "You're welcome," she murmured, already turning to leave. She was definitely late now, and Paula, her boss, would not be understanding about another delay. "Hey," he called, making her stop. "What's your name?" Sarah hesitated. It wasn't sensible to give personal information to strangers, her mother always said, but there was something in that look. "Sarah," she answered simply, before turning and walking hurriedly toward the agency. What she didn't see was the smile that formed on the man's lips as he watched her figure walk away, nor did she notice when he took a phone out of the pocket of his worn jacket, quickly dialing a number. "Found her," he said to someone on the other end of the line. "And she's exactly as you said she would be." Sarah's day at the agency started in the worst possible way. Paula was waiting for her at the entrance to her office, arms crossed and face stern. Without saying a word, she gestured for Sarah to follow her inside. "Do you know how much each minute of delay costs this agency, Sarah?" Paula asked, her voice as cutting as the cold wind outside. "Do you know how many competent professionals are waiting for an opportunity to occupy your position?" Sarah swallowed hard, feeling the coffee in her stomach turn to acid. "I'm sorry, Paula, it won't happen again." "Of course it won't," Paula replied, a humorless smile on her lips, "because today is your last day here." The world seemed to stop for a moment. "What do you mean?" Anderson Investments cancelled their contract with us this morning. Without them, we need to make cuts and you—" Paula made a dramatic pause. "Well, you've always been replaceable, haven't you?" Sarah felt her legs weaken. Anderson Investments was the agency's biggest client, responsible for almost 40% of the revenue. She had worked tirelessly on their campaign over the last few months, often staying up all night, sacrificing weekends. But the campaign, all the numbers indicated, it was going well. The engagement metrics, the public response. Apparently, Paula interrupted her, the heir of the company wasn't satisfied with our approach, said it lacked something human. She practically spat the last word. "For you have until the end of the day to clear your desk." The following hours passed in a blur of shock and disbelief. Sarah mechanically packed her belongings in a cardboard box, some photos, a plant she kept on her desk, a favorite mug. Her colleagues avoided looking in her direction, as if unemployment was contagious. When she finally left the building, it was already night. The temperature had dropped even more, but Sarah barely felt the cold. Her mind was occupied with desperate calculations. How long would her savings last? How would she pay the rent for the small apartment she had barely finished furnishing? So lost was she in her thoughts that she almost bumped into someone standing on the sidewalk. As she raised her eyes, ready to apologize, her heart gave a leap. It was the man from the morning, or at least it seemed to be him, but something was very different. Gone were the worn-out clothes and the woolen cap. Instead, he wore an impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary. His hair, now visible, was neatly styled, and his face was clean-shaven, revealing strong aristocratic features. But his eyes, those were the same intense brown eyes that had seemed to see right through her that morning. "Hello, Sarah," he said, his voice now clear and confident. "I think I owe you a coffee." She took a step back, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Who are you?" "Michael Anderson," he replied simply, "and I think we need to talk about your future in advertising." Sarah felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Michael Anderson, the heir of Anderson Investments, the man who had just destroyed her career, was there, smiling at her as if he had just told a particularly amusing joke. The box with her belongings slipped from her numb hands, scattering its contents across the sidewalk. Her favorite mug rolled until it stopped at Michael's elegantly shod feet, breaking into several pieces. Like her career, like her dreams, like her dignity. Sarah stared at Michael Anderson, her hands trembling no longer from cold, but from a rage that grew in her chest like a storm. Her belongings were scattered across the sidewalk. Photos, documents, memories of 2 years of hard work, reduced to a pathetic mess at the feet of the man who had just destroyed her career. "Was it fun?" she asked, her voice trembling with contained emotion. "Does playing with people's lives like this give you some kind of pleasure?" Michael bent down to pick up a photo that had escaped from the box. In it, Sarah smiled alongside her team after winning an award for a particularly successful campaign. "That wasn't my intention," he said softly, studying the image. "No?" Sarah laughed, a bitter sound that didn't match her young face. "Then what was it? Disguising yourself as a homeless man for what? To prove that people like me are stupid enough to believe in— To find someone real," he interrupted her, his eyes meeting hers with a disconcerting intensity. "Someone who wasn't interested in my money or my name." Sarah felt the bitter taste of irony in her mouth. "And it worked perfectly, didn't it? You found someone so real that you ended her job on the same day." She bent down to collect her belongings, ignoring when he tried to help. Their hands touched briefly over a pen, and Sarah pulled back as if she had been burned. "Let me explain," Michael asked, taking a step toward her. "The contract cancellation has nothing to do with you. Actually, she cut him off, finally managing to put everything back in the box. "It doesn't matter. You got what you wanted. Your little social experiment was a success. Congratulations." She started to walk away, but he gently held her arm. "Have dinner with me," he asked, almost pleaded. "Let me explain everything, please." For a moment, Sarah hesitated. There was something in his eyes, the same thing that had made her stop in the morning to offer coffee to a stranger. But then she remembered the look of pity from her colleagues, the cruel satisfaction on Paula's face, the weight of the box in her arms, the weight of a destroyed career. "No," she replied simply, pulling her arm away. "I've been humiliated. Enough for one day." As she walked away, the tears she had held back all day finally began to fall. The sound of her heels on the sidewalk seemed to mark the rhythm of each shattered dream, each lost hope. What she didn't see was Michael taking his phone out of his pocket once more. "We need to talk," he said to someone on the other end. "Now." The way home had never seemed so long. Every person passing by seemed to look at her with pity, as if they could see the failure stamped on her face. The subway was crowded as always, but Sarah had never felt so alone. In her small apartment, she dropped the box on the floor and let herself fall onto the sofa. The month's bills were stacked on the coffee table: rent, electricity, the loan, for the laptop she had bought to work from home. Her cell phone rang several times, but she ignored it. Probably her mother, who must have already heard the news. In a city like Chicago, bad news traveled at the speed of light. That's when she noticed something different in the box. Among her belongings was an envelope she didn't recognize. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was an elegant card, with just a few words written in firm handwriting. "Sometimes we need to lose everything to find what really matters. M." Attached to the card was a check with an amount that made her eyes widen. It was more money than she would earn in 5 years at the agency. Sarah stared at the check for long minutes, feeling the thin paper between her fingers. Then, with a deliberate movement, she tore it into small pieces. Her cell phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number. When she finally answered, the voice on the other end made her freeze. "Miss Sarah, this is from Anderson Investments. Mr. Michael Anderson would like to schedule a meeting with you tomorrow." The Anderson Investments building rose imposingly against Chicago's gray sky, its mirrored windows reflecting the heavy clouds that threatened rain. Sarah took a deep breath, adjusting the only suit she owned, the same one she had worn to her first job interview. She didn't know exactly why she had come. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe desperation, or maybe just the need to look into the eyes of the man who had played with her life and tell him exactly what she thought of him. The receptionist led her to the top floor with cold efficiency. The office was exactly as Sarah had imagined it would be, elegant, minimalist, with a breathtaking view of the city. Michael was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, contemplating Chicago as if it were his personal kingdom. "Thank you for coming," he said without turning around. "I didn't come for you," Sarah replied, staying close to the door. "I came because I need to understand." He finally turned to face her, and Sarah felt her traitorous heart skip a beat. Under the natural morning light, his eyes seemed even more intense, almost golden. "Please sit down," he gestured to one of the leather armchairs. "I prefer to stand." A small smile appeared at the corner of his lips, always on the defensive. "Give me a reason not to be." Michael sighed, running his hand through his hair in a gesture that made him seem almost vulnerable. "The cancellation of the contract with the agency had nothing to do with you or your work. Actually, it was exactly the opposite." He took a folder from his desk and handed it to her. Inside were reports, graphs, numbers that Sarah knew by heart. They were the results of the campaign she had developed. "Your numbers are impressive," he continued. "But more than that, your approach is different, human, real. It's exactly what we need here." Sarah leafed through the documents, feeling a confused mixture of pride and distrust. "What are you saying?" "I'm offering you the position of marketing director at Anderson Investments. Salary 3 times higher than what you earned at the agency. Full benefits, profit sharing." The air seemed to disappear from the room. Sarah closed the folder forcefully, almost dropping it. "So that's it? You destroy my career, humiliate me, and now you think you can simply buy me. That's not it." "No?" she interrupted him, her voice trembling with anger. "Then explain it to me. Explain to me why you disguised yourself as a homeless man. Explain to me why you cancelled the contract with the agency. Explain to me why you're doing all this." Michael took a step towards her, but Sarah backed away. "You want to know the truth? The truth is that I'm tired. Tired of people who only see the money, the name, the power. When I saw you this morning, offering coffee to a complete stranger without expecting anything in return—" "Stop!" Sarah raised her hand. "Don't turn a simple gesture of humanity into some kind of moral test. I am not your social experiment." "No, you're not," he agreed softly. "You're much more than that." The way he said those words, with an almost painful intensity, made something tremble inside her. For a moment, just a moment, Sarah allowed herself to see beyond the anger, and what she saw in his eyes frightened her even more. "I can't accept the job," she finally said, her voice firmer than she felt. "Why not?" "Because I don't trust you," she answered simply, "and I never will." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her once more. "What if I could prove that I'm trustworthy?" Sarah didn't turn around. "How?" "Have dinner with me. Once. If after that you still don't trust me, I'll never contact you again." She should say no. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to get out of there and never look back. But there was something in his voice, a note of sincerity that made her treacherous heart hesitate. "One dinner," she finally said, still, without turning around. "And then you leave me alone. Deal." When the elevator door closed, Sarah finally allowed the tears to fall. She didn't know if she was crying from anger, frustration, or fear. Fear because, despite everything, a small part of her desperately wanted to believe him. What she didn't know was that, the moment she left the building, her world was about to be turned upside down once more. Because Michael Anderson had a secret that would change everything. The restaurant chosen by Michael was located on the top of one of the oldest buildings in downtown Chicago. Sarah felt out of place as soon as she entered, conscious of her simple dress amid the discreet luxury of the environment. The maitre d' led her to a secluded table where Michael was already waiting for her. He stood up as she approached, and Sarah couldn't help but notice how different he looked. He wasn't wearing a suit this time, but rather a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked younger this way, more accessible. "You came," he said, as if he had expected her to give up. "I always keep my promises," she replied, sitting down. "Unlike some people." Michael accepted the jab without protest. The sommelier approached with the wine list, but before Michael could make a choice, Sarah interrupted him. "Water, please. I need to keep my mind clear tonight." A small smile appeared on his lips. "Always cautious." "Always realistic," she corrected. "So, are you going to tell me why you really did all this?" Michael took a sip of his own water, as if searching for the right words. "My father died 6 months ago," he began, his voice low. "It was sudden, an aneurysm. One minute he was making plans for the future of the company. The next—" He paused, and Sarah saw genuine pain in his eyes. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Before he died, he called me to the hospital. Do you know what he told me?" "Michael, I built an empire, but I never built a life." He spent 50 years accumulating money, power, influence, and in the end, he realized he was alone. "And that justifies playing with people's lives?" "No," he admitted. "It doesn't justify it, but after he died, I started to realize I was following the same path. Everyone around me wanted something. Money, favors, status. No one really saw me. So you decided to disguise yourself as a homeless man to find someone authentic," Sarah completed, the irony evident in her voice, like a prince looking for his Cinderella on the streets of Chicago. "It wasn't planned," he protested. "I was really trying to understand what it was like to be invisible, to be nobody. And then you appeared with that coffee and that smile." "Stop," Sarah raised her hand. "Don't romanticize a basic gesture of humanity. Any decent person would have done the same." "But they didn't," he insisted. "I spent 3 days on that sidewalk. Hundreds of people passed by me. Some threw coins. Others looked away. You were the only one who stopped, who looked me in the eyes, who treated me like a human being. The waiter arrived with the dishes that Michael had ordered in advance, but Sarah barely noticed the elegantly presented food in front of her. "And because of that, you decided to destroy my career?" "I cancelled the contract with the agency because I wanted you working directly for me," he admitted. "It was selfish, I know. But when I saw your work, the way you managed to capture the essence of people in your campaigns—" "You had no right," she said, her voice trembling. "That job was all I had. Do you have any idea how hard I fought to get there, what I sacrificed?" "Let me fix this," he asked, extending his hand across the table. "Accept the position at the company. You'll have total creative freedom, unlimited resources." Sarah laughed bitterly. "You really don't understand, do you? It's not about the job or the money or the opportunities. It's about trust. How can I trust someone who manipulates people like pieces on a board?" "Give me a chance to prove that I'm more than that," he pleaded. It was then that Sarah's phone vibrated. It was a message from her mother, with a link to an article from a gossip blog. The title made her blood freeze. "Anderson Investments heir seen with new conquest. Gold digger or personal marketing?" The photo showed the two of them entering the restaurant. The text insinuated that she had seduced Michael to get the position at the company. The comments were even worse. Sarah felt the dinner turning in her stomach. Without saying a word, she got up and ran out of the restaurant, ignoring Michael's calls. On the street, the rain that had threatened all day finally began to fall, but she barely felt the icy drops on her face. Her cell phone wouldn't stop ringing. She recognized the number. It was Paula, her ex-boss, probably wanting more dirty details to spread around the agency. When she finally arrived home, soaked and trembling, there was a voice message on her phone. It was from Michael. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I swear I didn't know. Please let me explain. She deleted the message before he could finish. Curled up in her bed, hugging her knees, Sarah allowed herself to cry all the tears she had held back. The following days were a nightmare for Sarah. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists wanting a statement, former colleagues feigning concern to get gossip, even some advertising agencies interested in taking advantage of her new visibility. She turned off her phone, closed her social media accounts, and hid in her apartment. Her savings were running out quickly, and the bills kept coming. The rent would be due in a week, and she had no idea how she would pay it. Her mother called. From the suburbs, concerned about the news that reached there. "Honey, maybe it's time to come home," she suggested gently. "You can teach English here. Start over." "No, Mom," Sarah replied, swallowing her wounded pride. "I won't let them defeat me like this." But each day it was becoming harder to maintain that determination. The job interviews she had managed to get were cancelled one by one. No one wanted to be associated with the gold digger of Anderson Investments, as the blogs called her. On a particularly difficult morning, she decided to face the outside world. She needed to go to the supermarket. Her cupboard was practically empty. On the way, she passed by the cafe where it had all begun. The place was crowded as always, hurried people coming and going with their coffee cups. That's when she saw him. Michael was standing across the street, in the same place where she had found him that first morning. But this time, he wasn't in disguise. He was wearing one of his expensive suits and holding 2 cups of coffee. Their gazes met across the busy street. For a moment, Sarah felt that same inexplicable connection as the first time. Then a group of executives passed by him, greeting him effusively, and the magic broke. She turned around and practically ran back home, her heart beating erratically. Upon arriving at her apartment, she found an envelope that someone had slipped under the door. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Sarah, I know you don't want to see or talk to me, and you have every right to feel that way. But I need you to know the truth. The article on the blog was planted by someone who wants to harm me, someone who doesn't want me to change the way the company is managed, someone who prefers that I continue to be the irresponsible playboy that everyone expects me to be. I discovered that Paula, your ex-boss, is involved. She provided information about you, distorted facts, created a narrative that served their interests. I've attached proof of what I'm saying. Emails, messages, bank transfers. I know this doesn't undo the harm they've caused you, but maybe it will help clear your name. I'm not asking for anything in return. I just want you to know that it was never my intention to hurt you. Michael. Sarah. Let the papers fall from her trembling hands. The evidence was irrefutable. Paula had received a considerable amount to feed the blogs with false stories about her. There was even a detailed plan of how to destroy her reputation in the advertising market. Her cell phone rang. She had turned it back on just to talk to her mother. It was an unknown number. When she answered, a familiar voice made her blood freeze. Well, if it isn't our little social climber, Paula said, her tone falsely sweet. I think we need to talk about certain information that has come to my desk. How about a coffee? Sarah felt something change inside her. The anger, the humiliation, the pain, it all transformed into a cold determination. Sure, Paula, she replied, surprising herself with the calmness in her voice. I think it's more than time we put all our cards on the table. As she prepared to leave, Sarah didn't know she was walking straight into a trap. Paula had one more ace up her sleeve, a secret that could destroy not only her career but also Michael's. And somewhere in the city, Michael was receiving a call that would make him question everything he believed in. The game was just beginning, and the stakes were higher than either of them imagined. The cafe chosen by Paula was located in a busy shopping center in the heart of Chicago. Sarah arrived purposely 10 minutes late, her heart beating strongly against her chest. She found her ex-boss sitting at a discreet table at the back of the establishment, distractedly stirring her cappuccino. Good that you could come. Paula smiled, that same fake smile that Sarah had learned to fear over the last few years. Sit down. Sarah remained standing. I prefer this to be quick. Always so defensive, Paula sighed theatrically. That's what has harmed you from the beginning, you know? This resistance to playing the game. What game, Paula? The one of destroying others' lives for money? Paula laughed, a cold and calculated sound. Don't be naive, darling. Everyone has a price. Yours was just higher than we imagined. She opened her elegant folder and took out a thick envelope. Do you know what's in here? The true story of your encounter with Michael Anderson. Sarah felt a chill down her spine. What are you talking about? Did you really think it was a coincidence that he was there on that sidewalk by chance? Paula slid a photo across the table. This was taken 3 days before your casual encounter. The photo showed Michael in a meeting with Paula. They seemed absorbed in a serious conversation, papers scattered on the table between them. This doesn't mean anything, Sarah said, but her voice trembled slightly. No? How about this? Paula took more photos from the envelope. In them, Michael appeared observing Sarah at different moments, leaving the agency, having coffee, having lunch with colleagues. He studied your habits for weeks. He knew exactly where and when to find you. The world seemed to spin around Sarah. She leaned on the nearest chair, her legs suddenly weak. Why? She managed to ask. Because he needed someone like you, someone talented, yes, but mainly someone pure. Paula practically spat the last word. The board was pressuring for changes in the company's image. Michael needed to prove he could be more than the irresponsible playboy. And you, with your natural talent for emotional marketing, were perfect for the role. Sarah finally sat down, her legs no longer supporting her weight. So everything was planned. Oh, not everything, Paula smiled, that cruel smile that Sarah knew so well. He didn't plan to fall in love with you. That was an interesting development. You're lying, Sarah whispered, but the photos in front of her told a different story. I am many things, darling, but a liar is not one of them. Ask him about the meeting of July 15th. Ask about Project Cinderella. Paula stood up, adjusting her designer bag on her shoulder. Oh, and there's one more thing you should know. She leaned in, whispering something in Sarah's ear. The color drained from the young advertiser's face. You're bluffing, Sarah said, her voice barely audible. I am many things, Paula repeated, but a bluffer is not one of them. By the way, Michael should be receiving some interesting information about you at this very moment. She left, leaving Sarah alone with the photos and a revelation that changed everything. Her cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Michael. I need to talk. Now. Sarah looked at the photos once more, her heart broken into 1,000 pieces. She had promised herself never to be manipulated, never to be used again. And yet, with trembling hands, she typed a response. There's nothing more for us to talk about. It's over. When she left the shopping center, the rain had started again, but Sarah barely felt the cold drops on her face. The tears that streamed down were much colder. What she didn't know was that at that exact moment, Michael was discovering an even more devastating truth about her past. A truth that would change everything, not just between them, but for the entire Anderson company. Has this been verified? He asked, his voice hoarse. 3 times, sir, his assistant replied. All documents are authentic. Michael stood up, walking to the window of his office. The city stretched below him, grey and cold like his mood. How had he been so blind? His cell phone vibrated with a message from Sarah. There's nothing more for us to talk about. It's over. He almost laughed at the irony. She probably thought she had discovered his secret, when in reality, the door to his office opened without warning. Paula entered, her smile of satisfaction barely contained. So, she said, have you received the information? Michael turned slowly. Why now? Because you were about to make a terrible mistake, she replied, sitting down without being invited. I thought you should know exactly who Sarah Miller is before handing over control of the company's marketing to her. And you have nothing to do with this, of course, he said, his voice loaded with sarcasm. I just fulfilled my duty to the company, as I've always done. Michael looked back at the documents. The photo of Sarah, much younger next to his father, caught his attention again. The date made him question everything. Why did she never mention it? Well, Michael, Paula smiled, do you really think she would admit that she knew your father? That she worked for him, that she was fired for— Enough, he interrupted her abruptly. You can leave now. When he was alone again, Michael sank into his chair, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. His cell phone rang. It was his lawyer. Mr. Anderson, we discovered a few more things about Miss Miller that you need to know. Not now, he ended the call. He took his personal cell phone, looking at the last photo he had of Sarah, taken discreetly that first morning when she offered him coffee. Her eyes were so sincere, her smile so genuine. How could it all have been a lie? The rain began to fall harder, transforming the view from his window into a grey blur. Somewhere in the city, Sarah was probably thinking the worst of him. And he couldn't blame her, not after discovering how his father had treated her years ago. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Anderson, your sister is here. Send her in. Amanda entered like a hurricane into his office, her heels echoing on the marble floor. What did you do? Hi to you too, sis. Don't come at me with irony, Michael. I just spoke with Sarah. He straightened in his chair. You what? She's devastated. She thinks you used her, that you planned everything from the beginning. And you think she didn't do the same? He asked bitterly, pushing the documents toward his sister. Amanda flipped through them quickly, her expression changing as she read. My God, have you talked to her about this? How? She doesn't answer my calls, doesn't respond to messages. Then go after her, Amanda exclaimed, exasperated. For God's sake, Michael, you're both suffering from misunderstandings. They're not misunderstandings, Amanda. They're secrets, lies. How can I trust her after this? And how can she trust you? His sister retorted. You weren't exactly honest either, were you? Michael ran his hands over his face, feeling the weight of every wrong decision he had made. What do you know that I don't? He finally asked. Amanda sighed, sitting in the chair in front of his desk. A lot. But I'm not the one who should tell you. Go after her, Michael, before it's too late. Too late for what? She's planning to leave Chicago. Tonight. Michael felt his heart stop for a moment. Where to? I don't know, but she sold practically everything she had, bought a one-way ticket. He didn't wait for his sister to finish. He grabbed his coat and ran for the door. Michael, Amanda called. There's one more thing you need to know about that photo with Dad. But he had already left, leaving his sister alone in the office with a secret that could change everything, if he arrived in time to hear it. Sarah's small apartment seemed even smaller, with boxes piled up on all sides. She had sold most of the furniture, keeping only one suitcase with clothes and another with her most personal belongings. The rest would be donated. Sitting on the floor, she leafed through an old photo album. Her hands stopped at a specific page, a photo of her at 18, newly arrived in Chicago, her eyes shining with hope and dreams. Next to her, an older man smiled paternally. "I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson," she whispered to the image. "I should have told your son the truth." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her freeze. They were determined, familiar footsteps. Her heart began to beat faster. The doorbell rang. "Sarah, I know you're in there. Please, open up." Michael's voice sounded different. There was a tone of urgency she had never heard before. "Go away," she replied, her voice trembling. "We have nothing more to talk about." "Yes, we do. About my father. About you. About everything." Sarah felt her blood freeze in her veins, so he already knew. "How did you find out?" she asked through the closed door. "The documents arrived today, the photo of you two. Why did you never tell me you knew my father, that you worked for him?" Sarah rested her forehead against the door, silent tears running down her face. "Because he made me promise never to tell." "Why?" "Open the door, Sarah." A new voice joined the conversation. "Amanda, he needs to know the truth, the whole truth." Sarah hesitated. Amanda had been the only person in the Anderson family who really knew her, who knew the whole story. With trembling hands, she finally unlocked the door. Michael entered first, his eyes immediately capturing the signs of her imminent departure. The boxes, the empty walls, the packed suitcase by the door. "You're really leaving," he said, not as a question. "I have nothing left that keeps me here." Amanda entered right after, carrying an old folder. "I think it's time for you two to know exactly what happened 7 years ago." She opened the folder and took out a letter yellowed by time. The firm handwriting was unmistakable. Richard Anderson, Michael's father. "Dad wrote this a week before he died," Amanda explained. "It was supposed to be delivered to you, Michael, but some people thought it better to keep it." Michael took the letter with slightly trembling hands. His eyes ran over the words, his expression changing with each line. "No," he whispered. "This can't be true." "It is true," Sarah confirmed softly. "Your father gave me my first job when I arrived in Chicago. He paid for my studies, guided me, was like a second father to me. But then Paula discovered it," Amanda completed, "and used the information to blackmail Dad. If he didn't fire Sarah, she would reveal that I was his daughter," Michael completed, his voice barely audible. "That Dad had an affair, years before he met Mom. That you, Sarah, you are my sister." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah hugged her own arms, as if trying to protect herself from the pain she saw in Michael's eyes. "I never knew," she said softly. "Your father never told me. He just called me one day, fired me without explanation, and made me promise never to seek out the Anderson family again. I only discovered the truth when Amanda reached out to me, months later." "That's why you never told me," Michael said, painful understanding in his voice. "That's why you reacted so badly when you discovered who I was." "I couldn't," Sarah sobbed. "How could I say I was your sister after starting to feel—" She didn't complete the sentence, but she didn't need to. The horror of the situation was stamped on both their faces. "So that day at the cafe," Michael said slowly, "when you offered me coffee—" "I really didn't know it was you," Sarah confirmed. "You looked so different from the photos I had seen, and afterwards when I found out it was too late, I was already in love," he completed, the word sounding like a death sentence. Amanda watched the two, silent tears running down her face. "There's more," she said softly. Much more. And you need to know everything before it's too late. Amanda pulled another document from the folder, a DNA test yellowed by time. I found this in Dad's safe along with the letter, she explained. He had the test done secretly, soon after Sarah started working at the company. Michael took the paper with trembling hands. His eyes ran over the numbers and technical terms until they reached the conclusion. Negative, he read aloud. The test came back negative. Sarah felt her legs weaken. Amanda quickly helped her sit down. But how? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. My mother's story was half true, Amanda explained gently. Your mother really worked for Dad. They really had a relationship, but you weren't his daughter. Then why, Michael asked, running his hands through his hair in frustration. Why all this secrecy? Why remove Sarah from the company? Because Paula discovered the test, Amanda answered, and threatened to reveal not just the old affair, but also that Dad had secretly investigated an employee. The scandal would have destroyed the company's reputation. So he did the only thing he thought he could do. He pushed me away, Sarah completed, painful understanding in her voice. To protect me from the scandal, to protect everyone. He never forgave himself, Amanda continued. That's why he wrote the letter. That's why he left all the evidence. He wanted the truth to be known after he... She didn't complete the sentence. She didn't need to. Michael approached Sarah slowly as if fearing she might disappear. So we're not... No, she confirmed, tears streaming down her face. We're not siblings. The relief she felt with this confirmation made her feel guilty. All those sleepless nights, torturing herself with the idea of being in love with her own brother. But that doesn't change anything, she said quickly, standing up. You still lied to me. You still planned our meeting, manipulated me. No, Michael interrupted her. I didn't plan it. Paula lied about that too. He took his cell phone from his pocket and showed a series of messages between him and his sister. It was Amanda's idea. She knew I was drowning after Dad's death, that I was losing my way. She convinced me to do something different, to try to see the world from another perspective. The homeless disguise, Sarah understood. Yes, but finding you, that was destiny. Sarah, the only truly honest moment in this whole story. He took a step toward her, but she backed away. How can I believe you? How can I trust after everything? Because he's telling the truth. A new voice joined the conversation. Paula was standing at the apartment door, which they had left ajar. Her normally controlled face showed signs of fatigue and... regret? What are you doing here? Michael asked, his voice hard. I came to confess, Paula replied, entering the apartment. I came to tell the whole truth before it's too late. She took an envelope from her purse. More documents, more secrets. Richard. Anderson wasn't just my boss, she began. He was my brother. The shock of the revelation silenced everyone. That's why you always had so much power in the company, Amanda understood. That's why Dad never fired you, even when I committed the worst mistake of my life, Paula completed. When I let my jealousy, my bitterness, destroy an innocent's life. She turned to Sarah. I saw how my brother treated you, like a daughter, the daughter I could never be for him. So when I discovered about the old affair, about the possibility of you really being his daughter, you used the information to push me away, Sarah concluded. Yes, and when he discovered you weren't his daughter, but kept the secret anyway. I was furious. I used that against him too. Tears were now streaming down Paula's face. And when Michael started getting close to you, when I saw that history could repeat itself, I couldn't allow it. I couldn't let someone I considered an intruder infiltrate the family again. So you planted all those stories, Michael said, manipulated all of us. Yes, Paula admitted, and now I realize I've become exactly the kind of person my brother most despised. She approached Sarah, extending the envelope. Here's everything, all the evidence of my manipulations, all the lies I told. Do whatever you want with it. I accept the consequences. Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands but didn't open it. Why now? She asked softly. Because I realized I'm doing exactly what I accused Richard of doing. keeping secrets that aren't mine, manipulating lives I have no right to manipulate. Paula headed to the door, but stopped before leaving. Your father would be proud of you, Michael, for having found someone who sees you for who you are, not for what you own. Don't make the same mistake he made. Don't let lies and secrets destroy something genuine. With those words, she left, leaving a heavy silence in the apartment. Michael turned to Sarah, who still held the closed envelope. What now? He asked softly. Sarah looked at her packed suitcase, at the piled boxes, at the documents in her hands and all the truths and lies that had built and destroyed their lives. Now, she said slowly, I think we need to talk, for real this time. Amanda smiled discreetly, picking up her purse. I'll leave you two to talk, she said, heading to the door. But first, she pulled out one more envelope from the folder. There's one more thing you need to see. Amanda handed the last envelope to Michael, her hands trembling slightly. Dad left this specifically for this moment, for when you two finally discovered the whole truth. The envelope was sealed with the official stamp of Anderson Investments. Michael opened it carefully, revealing a letter and a set of legal documents. My dear son, he began to read aloud, his voice choked with the emotion of seeing his father's handwriting again. If you are reading this letter, it means you have finally discovered the truth about Sarah, about Paula, about all the secrets I kept for so long. It also means that somehow fate has brought you two together, exactly as I always knew it would. When I met Sarah, I saw in her the same determination I always admired in you, the same inner strength, the same sparkle in her eyes when she talks about her dreams. She reminded me so much of your mother when she was young, not in appearance but in essence. The DNA test I did wasn't just to confirm if she was my daughter. It was because from the first moment I wished she would be part of our family, one way or another. The documents accompanying this letter are my last act as president of Anderson Investments. It's my business testament, so to speak. In it, I leave specific instructions about the future leadership of the company. Michael, you have always been more than a businessman. You have a heart that I, unfortunately, suppressed in the name of business. Sarah has the vision our company needs, the ability to see people beyond numbers. Together, you can transform Anderson Investments into something greater than a financial empire. You can make it a place where people and profits are not mutually exclusive. Therefore, my last decision as president is this. The company can only be completely transferred to your command, Michael, when you find someone who shares not just the business vision, but the human vision that we lacked so much over the years. Looking at Sarah that first day, I knew she would be that person. Not because I wished she was my daughter, but because I saw in her everything our company. And you, my son, needed. Forgive me for the secrets. Forgive me for not being strong enough to face Paula, to defend the truth. In the end, my cowardice almost destroyed something precious before it could even begin. Amanda was put in charge of guarding this information until the right moment. She has always been the wisest among you. She knew to wait, observe, guide you to this moment without directly interfering. The future of the company is now in your hands, both of yours. Don't make the same mistakes I made. Don't let fear and pride destroy something true. With love, Richard Anderson. Michael let the letter fall onto the table, his hands trembling. Sarah was paralyzed, silent tears streaming down her face. He knew, she whispered. From the beginning, he knew this would happen. Not exactly, Amanda gently corrected. He hoped. Dad was always a brilliant strategist, but even he couldn't predict the details. The coffee that morning, the disguise, all that was destiny. Or free will, Michael said, his voice hoarse with emotion. He turned to Sarah, his eyes seeking hers. We chose, Sarah. In each moment, each decision, we chose to follow our hearts, even when everything seemed to conspire against us. He picked up the legal documents, studying them quickly. It's all here, he said, surprised. The company restructuring plan, the division of responsibilities, even a proposal for a new social responsibility department. Exactly what you wanted to implement, Sarah completed softly. What we both dreamed of doing. Amanda watched the two with a gentle smile. "There is one more thing you need to see," she said, taking one last document from the folder. "Something that will finally put all the ghosts of the past to rest." The paper she held had the letterhead of a well-known laboratory. It was another DNA test, but this one was different. The date was from just a week ago. "What is this?" Michael asked, confused. "The final proof," Amanda replied. "The proof that some things are greater than coincidences, greater than elaborate plans. Some things are simply destiny," Sarah completed, taking the document with trembling hands. "It's not possible," Michael whispered, looking at the results. "It's more than possible," Amanda smiled. "It's true. You and Sarah aren't siblings, but you share a common ancestor. A great-great-grandmother, Mary Augustine Anderson, who had 2 children from different marriages. One of them gave rise to our lineage, the other to mine," Sarah completed, amazed. "That's why your father felt that immediate connection with me. That's why all these events seemed so predestined," Michael concluded. "Not because someone planned it, but because somehow the Anderson blood found its way back home." Amanda picked up her purse, preparing to leave. "I think you two have a lot to talk about," she said softly. "And this time without secrets, without half-truths, just what's real." When the door closed behind her, Michael and Sarah found themselves alone, surrounded by papers that told the story of their lives, a story much larger and older than either of them could have imagined. "So," Sarah said after a long moment of silence, "what do we do now?" Michael took a step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Now? Now we start over, the right way this time." He extended his hand, as if wanting to touch her, but stopped halfway. "If you want to." Sarah looked at the suitcase by the door, at the stacked boxes, all her escape plans, her fresh start somewhere else. Then she looked at Michael, at the man she had met that cold morning, sitting on the sidewalk with an empty cup in his hands. "You know," she said, a small smile forming on her lips. "I know a great cafe nearby. How about we have a cappuccino and talk about the future?" Michael smiled, that same smile that had captivated her from the first moment. "Only if you let me pay this time." "No way," she laughed, picking up her purse. "You still owe me for that first coffee." When they left the apartment, the rain had finally stopped. The sun was beginning to break through the clouds, painting the city with a golden light that seemed promising. At the cafe, they sat at the same table where it had all begun. The barista recognized them, smiling discreetly as he prepared their orders. "Where were you going to go?" Michael asked softly, looking at her over his cup. "It doesn't matter anymore," Sarah answered honestly. "I think I've finally found my place." Their fingers touched lightly on the table, not by accident this time, but by choice. And in that moment, with the aroma of fresh coffee in the air and the Chicago sun shining through the windows, both knew that some stories don't need grand gestures or dramatic twists. Sometimes all we need is a hot coffee, an open heart, and enough courage to give love a second chance. Even if it comes in disguise, even if it brings with it century-old secrets and impossible coincidences. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how long it takes us to find our way back home. What matters is that when we finally get there, we recognize the place as our own. And so, on an ordinary morning in Chicago, between cups of coffee and complicit smiles, 2 souls that had always been destined to meet finally found their new beginning. Not as heirs to an empire, not as pieces in a power game, but simply as 2 people who chose to see beyond appearances and believe in the magic of new beginnings. Weeks later, when the new board of Anderson Investments was announced, no one was surprised to see Michael and Sarah side by side in the official photo. What surprised them were the changes they implemented together: social programs, humanized policies, a new way of doing business that honored both the Anderson legacy and the vision of a more fair and compassionate future. And if anyone noticed that the CEO and the new marketing director always had coffee together every morning at the same corner cafe, well, some stories are simply destined to have a happy ending, even if they begin with a simple gesture of kindness on a cold winter morning.